Welcome back to London. The Queen is one of the most recognizable people in the world. Despite decades in the public eye, though, she's remained largely inscrutable. I spoke with Robert Hardman, who has covered the royals for years and just wrote a biography called Queen of Our Times. 70 years is an awfully long time for anyone to be in any role. What do you think is the significance of this moment?
We're in uncharted territory. Britain and the Queen's other realms have never had a monarch who's been on the throne 70 years. You now have to be really of the wartime generation to remember a time when there was a different face on the coins and on the stamps and on the banknotes. I mean, it's just one of those moments, I think, where certainly in this country, we just sort of stand back and realise that although we've taken the Queen pretty much for granted for the best part of 70 years, because she's so reliable, she's always there, she always turns up, she always does what we expect her to do. Now's the time to realise actually that is quite something, what she's done, and it's a moment to sort of salute that. Although she doesn't see it that way. It's quite interesting. She sees this Jubilee as a moment for her to say thank you to us. So it's a great mutual admiration society.
Well, I wanted to ask you, what do you think the significance of this Platinum Jubilee is for the Queen herself?
Well, she always has slightly mixed views about Jubilees because we all get terribly excited and wave flags and hold street parties. But of course for her, it's really marking the anniversary of her father's death. And that's why Accession Day, February the 6th, is a day she always spends privately. It's quite a somber day. But obviously she fully accepts, in the nature of monarchy. I mean, reigns span X number of years and she accepts it and realises that this is phenomenal. So I think for her, it's a great reflection on what she's achieved, and it is considerable. I mean, to have held the country and the institution together all these years, to be running a hereditary institution that's as strong today as it was when she took over. I mean, that's really what the best she could have hoped for, and she's done that. And I think also there's going to be a slightly a sort of mournful note to this, because there is one gaping hole in this Jubilee, and there's no Prince Philip, and he's been such a part of everything she's done. So I think he will certainly he'll get referred to quite a lot in speeches and sermons and that sort of thing. He'll be very much on the minds of the family, that's for sure.
I wanted to pick up on something you said. The sovereignty as strong now as it was when she became Queen. I think some people might take issue with that.
Yeah, I mean, people will look and say, oh, look at the monarchy, all sorts of crises. I mean, it's always faced crises. Clearly, in 1952, 53, it was a totally different world then. But actually, the number of people who didn't want a monarchy, the number of Republicans, the percentage of people in Britain who favoured an alternative system, pretty much the same then as it is now. And fairly soon after the initial sort of honeymoon phase at the start of the reign, the monarchy was getting involved in various crises at one point to do with the fact that Prince Philip was away for a long time, that the monarchy was seen as detached, as elitist, as too grand, as out of touch. And in the 60s, it was a sort of object of satire. I mean, the monarchy being on the receiving end of a bit of a kicking from the media is something that she's sort of put up with right through her reign. And then you look at the 90s, I mean, that was a very, very dark period. 92. Much worse than now. I mean, 92, she famously talked of as her annus horribilis, but it really marked the start of a sort of 5-year period of fractured marriages, rows over money, culminating, of course, in the tragic death of Diana when she was perceived to be out of touch. I mean, those were seriously not quite existential, but I mean that was a real crisis period for the monarchy because it affected the direct line of succession. It cast doubt on the Queen's heir. And
I guess we kind of collectively move past those things and we look at the latest crisis.
Of course, yeah, we do. We're always looking at the here and now and thinking, oh my goodness, how is she going to cope with this?
The Harry and Meghan question.
Harry, Meghan, Andrew, these are, I'll call them challenges rather than crises. I mean, they're not an immediate threat to the whole institution. But this is what she's been going through all her reign. I think one of the problems perhaps with some of the dramatizations, like The Crown, they sort of depict the monarchy as really just sort of lurching from one crisis to the next, and the Queen's sort of constantly put upon. And what it overlooks is actually that for most of the time, I mean, she loves being queen. She enjoys it. She has absolutely no wish to sort of hang up her crown. She's always felt, this is what I'm for. This is my duty.
There have been seismic shifts in public attitudes during the Queen's reign. How aware is she of the changing times, of how she needs to change with the times?
She's very aware. I mean, she might not show it, because that's not the nature of monarchy. You don't just sort of suddenly respond like a weather vane. You have to absorb shifts in public opinion, and you have to respond to them, and you have to accept that life isn't always going to be the same. I mean, Prince Philip once said to me, actually the monarchies that have gone, the reason they went, most of them, wasn't because of revolution or radicals. It was because the people around them just kept them cocooned and wrapped in cotton wool and wouldn't let them change. And you have to change, and you have to do it. You have to evolve. Monarchy is a work in progress. It's got to move with the times. It can't move ahead of the times. But I thought it was a very interesting moment, only 11 years ago, when just after the Cambridges got married, and it was clearly they were about to start a family, and the Queen could see that there was a need to change the laws of succession. And successive British governments have had a go at this over the years, of trying to amend some of the various arcane rules, not least male primogeniture, where boy trumps girl in a line of succession, the rule that prevented members of the royal family marrying a Roman Catholic. And if you did, then you got kicked out of the line of succession. All these sort of rules had accumulated for sort of historical reasons. They're clearly out of date, but to unravel them was constitutionally, politically, legally quite complicated. So governments had shied away from it. But suddenly, there was this very imminent prospect that William and Kate might have a girl, and then they might have a boy. And how's that going to look in 21st century Britain? And it's the Queen's private secretary who, very discreetly, but he starts putting together a sort of package of reforms. And at the Commonwealth Summit in Perth in 2011, all the Commonwealth government, all the prime ministers of all her realms get together in a room, and they all agree in the space of an hour, right, this has got to change. And it all just happens. And no one really notices it. It just sort of happens imperceptibly. But as I say in my book, I mean, it's one of the biggest set of constitutional reforms in a century. And it's just the sort of thing that the Queen does, I mean,
she knows it's time.
It's time, and she just lets it be known. She doesn't get involved in the negotiations. It's not her role. This is for politicians to decide. This involves changing laws, and she doesn't do laws. She signs them, but politicians do them. They legislate. But nonetheless, when she lets it be known something needs to be done, it gets done. She's transformed the whole structure of the royal household. I mean, it was a sort of Edwardian, if not Victorian, institution when she took over. I mean, it was still based on essentially who you knew. It was run by a bunch of, occasionally clever but occasionally very stupid aristocrats, and now it's a total meritocracy. It's still got sort of titles and carriages and crowns and all the stuff we expect of a monarchy, but it's actually a very modern institution at the same time. And that's, again, it's done without a lot of noise. It's done very quietly, because that's how she likes to change things. But boy, has she changed it a lot.